Hey, why don't you come to Mom's funeral, sis? What? I never thought you were such a terrible person. I was caught off guard as my younger brother's words pierced through the phone line. His tearful voice held no hint of deceit. James, Mom passed away 5 years ago, you know. My name is Jessica, I reminded him gently. I'm a 30-year-old office worker dating a man named Robert. We're starting to get serious, and he's eager to meet my parents. But there's a weight of guilt pressing on me. Both my parents have passed away, having divorced years ago amidst irreconcilable differences. I was just 16 then. After the divorce, I lived with my father, who cared for me deeply. He supported my piano lessons and studies, and I took on household chores in return. Cooking dinner, making rice balls, anything to see his smile of approval. Then came college, where I excelled, much to my father's pride. He encouraged me to visit my mother, who lived with my younger brother James. Big sister Jessica, long time no see. We shared brief moments of joy during those visits. But after my mother remarried, things changed. My husband-to-be wanted me to focus on our life together, which strained my relationship with my previous family. Though I wished them happiness, conflicting emotions swirled within me as I navigated this new chapter of my life. But I don't want to lose the opportunity to see my brother. Can't we just reduce the frequency of our meetings? I'm sorry, but James is entering adolescence and I don't want to confuse him too much. I see, but once we get used to our new life, I'm sure my husband will let us meet. Yeah, I understand. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I didn't want to protest and risk damaging my mother and brother's relationship with their new family. So, I decided to endure it. Years passed. I finished college and landed a job. Yet during that time, I couldn't see my brother or mother. 4 years had gone by, and I couldn't help but wonder why they couldn't spare even a moment to meet me. Perhaps they were leading such fulfilling lives that they no longer needed me. My brother, who was just 11 when we last met, was now 15. I wanted to offer him some encouragement as he prepared for private high school entrance exams. With that thought in mind, I mustered the courage to call my mother. To my surprise, an unfamiliar man answered the phone. Hello, who is this? Isn't this my mother's number? Are you Jessica by any chance? Yes, I am. I'm David, the man who remarried your mother. She's busy right now, so I answered the phone. Oh, I see. Well, it's been 4 years since I last saw them, and I was thinking I'd like to see my brother and mother soon. Really? You haven't seen them? No, I haven't seen them at all. I see. Maybe your mother doesn't want to see you. What? Actually, when I mentioned your name just now, my wife didn't react at all. Is James not around? I at least want my brother to respond to my call. I was thinking that, but James is right next to me. He's just playing a game and not reacting at all. It seems like they've both forgotten about you and adapted to their current lives. They're both living happily, so could you please leave them alone? I'm gonna hang up now, David stated before ending the call. I was left so stunned that I couldn't move for a while after the conversation ended. The thought that my brother and mother might have forgotten about me and were living their lives without me was too much to bear. Seeking solace, I turned to my father for advice. That's strange. Those two love you, Jessica, he reassured me. He tried to reach out to my mother, but her response was firm. Please don't call again. In the end, we couldn't meet or even speak to my mother and brother. Life carried on, and I became increasingly occupied with work. Still, they lingered in the back of my mind. Then, about 3 years after that distressing phone call, I received devastating news. What? Mom. It was a notification informing me that my mother had died in a traffic accident. Rushing to the hospital, I was led to the room where her lifeless body lay. Her peaceful expression made it seem as if she were merely sleeping with her eyes closed. I never imagined I'd see her again like this. Sis, a voice broke through my mourning. James. As I grieved my mother's passing, my brother entered the room. It had been 7 long years since I last saw him, and he had grown into a completely different person. Why didn't you come to see us? He questioned, his tone filled with hurt. Did you start hating me and Mom? Wait a minute, I interjected. It was your stepfather, David, who told me not to see you. Dad would never say something like that, James rebutted firmly. Dad's an amazing person, and I look up to him. He wouldn't say something like not meeting with you, sis. What? My brother's trust in our stepfather, David, was evident. They must have developed a strong bond over the past 7 years. Then, a man who seemed to be David arrived. "Hi, it's our first time meeting in person, isn't it?" he greeted. "Hello." David appeared to be in his early 50s with a determined air about him, as if he could accomplish anything. Despite encountering various company employees in my line of work, he struck me as somewhat cunning. "I'm really shocked that my wife passed away so suddenly. The funeral will be held soon, so I'd like both you and your father to attend, Jessica," David informed me. Understood. Though my mind was preoccupied, attending my mother's funeral took precedence. My father and I went together to bid her farewell. The funeral proceeded without incident, but a dispute over the inheritance soon arose. "Jessica hasn't seen my wife in 7 years, so could you please give up the inheritance?" David proposed. "What? Wait a minute," I interjected. "Wasn't it David who didn't let me see her?" "Sis, are you still saying that? How many times do I have to explain that Dad would never do that?" James countered. No matter how desperately I pleaded, my brother wouldn't believe me. "Oh dear, it seems I've become the villain here," David remarked. "Dad's not wrong. Sis is just saying weird things," James asserted. "Sis, I don't really understand inheritance, but will you give it up?" he pressed. "What? I should at least receive the minimum inheritance, right? What would Mom think if she saw you being so greedy about money?" I retorted, feeling as though David treated me as if I were money-grubbing. At this point, my father intervened. "Wait a minute, my daughter is only claiming her rightful share. Stop making such accusations." Thanks to my father's words, David fell silent. "No matter what you say, I'll make sure my daughter gets at least the minimum inheritance." "What's this? Are you and Sis conspiring to make things difficult for us?" David challenged. "That's not the case. This is just a claim of rights," my father clarified. The discussion grew heated, and in the end, I received only the minimum inheritance, but it created a divide between my brother and me. My antagonistic relationship with David, my brother's trusted stepfather, caused this rupture. Finally reconnecting with my brother after so long, only to be met with his disdain, compounded the sadness of losing my mother. As if that weren't enough, more misfortune followed. My father was diagnosed with cancer, given only 1 more year to live. It felt like an onslaught of crushing blows, leaving me asking, "Why is this happening to me?" I spiraled into negativity. But my father, noticing my change, gently spoke to me. "Jessica, everyone dies someday. It's not something we can control. I've been happy living with you all this time, and I intend to enjoy the time I have left to the fullest." Dad? In the time that remained, we went on trips and did everything he wanted to do. When he passed away, I was left with an unbearable pain from losing both of my beloved parents. Yet my father's last words echoed in my mind: "Look forward and enjoy every moment of life." With his words as my guide, I wiped away my tears and chose to move forward. At my father's funeral, my brother arrived, accompanied by David. This presence fueled my brother's aggression towards me, his focus solely on my father's inheritance. "Sis, you forcibly took part of Mom's inheritance, so I'm definitely taking Dad's inheritance," he asserted. I didn't want to engage in further conflict or hostility, so I quietly agreed. "Yes, of course, I was planning to give it to you anyway," I responded calmly, making arrangements for the inheritance to be transferred to my brother. Since then, I haven't seen or heard from my brother. It felt awkward reaching out to him, and years passed by. Eventually, I met Robert through a friend's introduction. As our relationship progressed towards marriage, I decided to disclose everything to him about the loss of both my parents and the strained relationship with my only sibling, my brother. Despite knowing all this, Robert still wanted to marry me, and I found myself falling in love with him. As our courtship continued smoothly and we received a marriage proposal, I felt like I was on top of the world. But then, in a sudden twist, I received a call from my brother. "Hello, James," I greeted, surprised and elated to hear from him after so long. "What's up?" "Oh, speaking of which, I have something to tell you too." However, before I could say anything, my brother interrupted me with an accusation that left me bewildered. "Sis, why didn't you come to Mom's funeral? I never thought you were such a terrible person," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "What? I don't think my sister was such a terrible person," I responded, utterly confused by his sudden accusation over the phone. "What's going on? Why are you saying something so nonsensical all of a sudden?" "Nonsensical? Mom's dead, you know?" he retorted, his voice filled with anguish. "Wait, James, calm down. I urged, struggling to make sense of the situation. How can I calm down? Was this some kind of cruel joke? He questioned, his voice breaking. No, it was too harsh for that, I realized, feeling the weight of the truth in my brother's sobbing voice. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before addressing my brother James. James, Mom died 5 years ago. I began slowly, expecting him to understand. But his response shocked me to the core. What are you talking about? Mom didn't die back then. What? What are you saying? You saw Mom's body too, didn't you? We even had the funeral, I countered, confusion clouding my thoughts. His insistence only added to my bewilderment. No, Mom was alive. I lived with her for about 3 years after that. What? What do you mean? James's voice trembled with disbelief. So, I was living with Mom, I tried to explain, struggling to grasp the situation myself. It's best to go along with the story at times like this, I reasoned, trying to make sense of the apparent disconnect. Yes, but they said she would die soon without an offering. I gave all the money I earned as an offering, James confessed, his voice heavy with regret. Suddenly, it dawned on me that my brother had been deceived. What? At that moment, I realized that my brother had been deceived, but the offering wasn't enough, and Mom died. James, can you introduce me to the person you've been making offerings to? I asked urgently, wanting to understand the full extent of the deception. Of course, you should be saved too, sis, he responded earnestly, leading me to the person who had supposedly rescued Mom. Later, as we entered the office building where counseling was conducted, I felt a sense of unease. Teacher, my brother called out as we stepped into the private office. And there, to my astonishment, was David. Wait a minute, you're the one who remarried my mother and became James's stepfather, right? Why is James calling you teacher? I demanded, my confusion growing. James and I have a patient-teacher relationship, David explained calmly, though his presence only fueled my suspicion. What? No, you live with James, right? James even called you Dad, I protested, struggling to comprehend the situation. Sis, what are you talking about? David is a counselor. Dad died 3 years ago, remember? James interjected, his voice tinged with concern. Wait, David, are you brainwashing James? I accused, unable to shake off the feeling of dread creeping over me. What are you talking about? I've just been listening to him. Before that, I was counseling his mother, David clarified, though his explanation did little to alleviate my growing unease. What? You deceived my mother too? I accused, feeling a surge of anger and betrayal. Sis, don't say such terrible things like deceived, James pleaded, his expression torn between confusion and distress. Jessica seems quite confused. Well, it's understandable. Losing both parents can often lead to mental illness. David interjected, his tone patronizing. What are you talking about? You've unconsciously put a stopper in your mind to avoid facing reality. You're suppressing the grief of losing your parents, he concluded, his words sending a chill down my spine. I can help you release it. Stop it. I'm already looking forward and living my life. Really? Aren't you just enduring it? I'm not enduring anything. It's better not to force yourself. If you do as I say, your heart will feel much lighter. Really? Really? James became cheerful that way too, so why not entrust yourself to me? Yes, please. Good girl. Now, sit here and think about your mom and dad. When I place my hands on your head, the sad feelings will magically disappear. How about it? Do you feel lighter? No, I don't feel any lighter. I see. Maybe it's because the offering is 0, so there is not enough power. What? If you really want to get better, you have to make a lot of offerings. Is that so? Yeah, so let's start with an offering of $1,000. $1,000? That's still not enough to be completely healed. You need to make more and more offerings. Is that so? James made offerings too, right? Yes, he's been making offerings ever since he graduated from high school and started working. That's how he was able to find his mother and regain happy days. But the offerings stopped at one point, and his mother really died this time. So, he's reflecting on that and increasing his offerings to be saved. I see. I called out towards the entrance. That's how it is, Robert. As I said that, the door to the room opened, and my fiancé, Robert, walked in. Who exactly are you? David asked, with a suspicious look at Robert, who then handed David his business card. I'm a lawyer. I've been listening to your conversation, and it seems you've been brainwashing James and swindling a large sum of money from him. A lawyer? He's also my fiancé, and we're going to sue you and recover the money." As I said that, David momentarily looked flustered, but then snorted and retorted, "I thought you'd say something like that. James was saved by me. There's no fact that I deceived him. I was just providing legitimate counseling, right, James?" David asked my brother with a triumphant look on his face. My brother glanced at us and then said, "I was deceived by you and forced to contribute a large sum of money." "You, James." David's eyes widened at my brother's statement. "It seems your brother intends to sue you. Wait, this must be some mistake, right, James? I saved you. Are you going to betray me like this?" "Teacher, I do think that thanks to you, both my mother and I felt relieved many times. But it's also true that you were gradually brainwashing us, right? In fact, I became unable to make sound judgments because of you. You brought a woman who looked like my mother and made me believe that she was actually alive. And then, you instilled fear that she would die if I didn't make offerings. Moreover, you disposed of all the photos of my mother and me without my noticing and replaced them with composite photos of a fake mother. The pictures were so sophisticated and natural that I naturally believed the fake mother was my real mother. And before I knew it, almost all of my salary from the years since I graduated from high school and started working was taken by you. When I met my sister and saw the real photos of my mother, the brainwashing suddenly broke. That's when I decided to sue you, capturing evidence if you actually demanding an exorbitant amount of money. You betrayed me," David exclaimed, stunned by my brother's revelation. "Don't mess with me. You're the one who kept swindling money from me and my mother. You brainwashed us, telling us not to meet my sister and even made us lie that you were our stepfather. My mother died without seeing my sister for years. I'll not only get back the money you took from me but also the money you took from my mother. You've sucked money from us and enjoyed yourself. Now suffer misfortune." My brother angrily confronted David with such intensity that David stumbled back in surprise. "Then we'll see you in court," Robert said, and we left the scene. After that, James sued David under Robert's legal representation. David was ordered to pay back the total amount of $300,000 that he had swindled from my brother and mother. Not only was David ordered to pay compensation, but his outrageous fraudulence became known to his previous patients and their families, and he seems to be in serious trouble due to lawsuits and compensation claims from many people. He had been doing as he pleased for so long that he deserved to be punished. I realized that our relationship had been strained because of the brainwashing, and with everything resolved, the resentment between my brother and me disappeared. My brother also attended my wedding with Robert. I hadn't seen my brother for many years because of David, but now I want to fill that gap by regularly meeting and getting along well with my only sibling. Finally, Dad's passed away. What a relief. He was a stubborn old man with money, but he was nothing but a nuisance. On the day of the funeral, Alex's expression was more of a smirk than sadness. "How can you say that?" he scoffed. "You had debts that Dad took care of." "Shut up. He wouldn't die and kept racking up hospital bills. Now I can finally use his money as I see fit." "How dare you? You've been living off Dad all this time. Say what you want. You're on your own now. You're useless. Just leave." "Brother-in-law, how could you?" William chimed in, scolding Alex. Meanwhile, their sister-in-law, who was also present, laughed dismissively and said, "Marriage doesn't make you family. I'm sure even your father-in-law wouldn't want outsiders here. You should leave right away." Her words shattered something inside me. To insult my father and deny our bond, these people are truly vile. There was no point in arguing further. The last thing I wanted was to disrupt my father's funeral. I fought to keep my anger in check and resigned myself to the situation. I could barely manage to say a few words before I chose to bid my final farewell to my father and leave. I promised myself never to associate with these people again. "My name is Lily. I work as a nurse at a children's hospital. I married William, a radiologic technologist I met through work a few years ago. Our on-call schedules make it difficult to find time for just the two of us, but we treasure the moments we do have together. William's role is crucial. Imaging plays a vital part in diagnosing and treating patients. He handles numerous imaging tasks daily, always on the lookout for even the smallest abnormalities. which adds significant pressure to his job. Despite the demands of his work, I deeply respect William for his dedication. He often tells me how much he admires my commitment to communicating with patients and their families, even with my hectic schedule. Once upon a time, I could hardly imagine that I would become a source of help for others or that such joyful days would ever be in my future. My father worked for a major trading company and was often stationed abroad, leaving my mother, Alex, and me to manage on our own. In that environment, my mother and Alex treated me more like a servant than a family member. "Didn't I tell you to clean this up? You're so useless. Hey Lily, get me some juice. You've got a minute." This harsh treatment and constant demands were a regular part of my life. My mother, who was devoted to Alex, made me feel like nothing more than a bother. Seeing her behavior, Alex grew up to adopt the same domineering attitude towards me. As a child, I did everything I could to meet their expectations, but despite my efforts, both my mother and Alex continued to belittle me, even when my father returned from his overseas assignments. By the time I was in high school, their attitudes hadn't changed. Although my father tried to defend me, my mother and Alex blamed him for everything. "I raised these two all on my own while you were away," my mother would say. "You didn't lift a finger to help, and now you're back and trying to play the role of dad? We've managed just fine without you. Don't come in here acting all high and mighty." Despite my father's attempts to argue with them, no resolution was reached. Eventually, their anger shifted from him to me. Watching this, my father felt powerless to confront my mother and Alex, fearing it would only make things worse for me. Despite his presence, he was filled with regret for not being able to change their attitudes and tearfully apologized to me. "I'm sorry, but just having my father there saved me from being treated like I was useless and a nuisance by my mother and Alex. I felt as though I were lost in a dark tunnel, unsure of my own worth." Then my father told me, "Lily, you're not useless. You're not a nuisance. You're part of our family, and you're a good person who belongs here." Those words were enough to keep my spirits up, even when my mother and Alex continued to belittle and order me around. Knowing that my father was there to support me kept my heart from darkening. When it came time for me to graduate high school, my mother insisted that I start working immediately, forbidding me from attending college. Meanwhile, Alex, who barely studied, was allowed to go to a private university and waste his time. Despite this, my father refused to stay silent. He asked me what I wanted for my future and assured me that I could make my own choices. His support gave me hope and a sense of direction for my own path. After years of being at the beck and call of my mother and Alex, I had never really considered my own future. But now, I began to seriously think about what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted a career where I could genuinely help people, so I decided to become a nurse. When I shared my aspiration, my father quietly took action behind the scenes. He arranged for me to attend nursing school, covering the entrance fees and finding me a place to stay, all without my mother or Alex finding out. Thanks to his efforts, I was able to enroll in nursing school without any obstacles. Since then, I only returned home when my mother passed away. Throughout nursing school and beyond, I stayed in touch with my father. When I landed my first job, passed my national exams, started dating William, and eventually decided to get married, my father was overjoyed. He celebrated these milestones as if they were his own achievements. Meanwhile, I worried about him being alone at home, but he always reassured me, saying, "I'm fine," and dismissed any concerns I raised. My father, who had always been stoic and never showed signs of weakness, mentioned during a phone call that he was feeling some discomfort in his midsection. Although he downplayed it as just a minor pain, I had a feeling he was underestimating the issue. I suggested he visit the hospital for a checkup. A few days later, he called to say that his endoscopy had shown no issues. I felt a sense of relief, but my husband, William, was not entirely convinced. He pointed out that an endoscopy might not detect all problems and recommended a cancer screening as a precaution. I passed on William's suggestion to my father and urged him to follow through. The results of the cancer screening were a devastating blow. My father had pancreatic cancer. Although the diagnosis was shocking, we were relieved to learn that the cancer was still at a stage where it could potentially be removed through surgery. My father was soon admitted for the operation. The news initially cast me into a dark place, but fortunately, the surgery was successful. When William and I visited him in the hospital, despite his evident fatigue, he greeted us with a warm smile. Just as I began to feel a bit of relief seeing my father looking better than expected, the door to his room flew open. Alex and a woman entered abruptly. Alex gave us a brief, dismissive glance before striding into the room with little regard for our presence. "Get out," he said, gesturing toward the door as if we were obstructing him. The woman with him, whom I quickly recognized as Grace, Alex's new wife, was also signaling for us to leave. From what my father had told me about Alex's marriage, I knew this had to be his wife. "Can't you wait a moment? We just got here," I protested, but Alex merely smirked at me, his expression dripping with disdain. As if talking to Dad will make any difference. "I understand, but I've hardly had a chance to speak with him," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Brother-in-law, please give us a bit more time," my husband pleaded with Alex. But Alex shot back bluntly. "So you're the one who married Lily, huh? I don't care if you're a radiology tech or whatever. Without doctors, nurses, and techs, none of you matter. So don't get all high and mighty." He smirked with a self-satisfied sneer. And before we could even rise from our seats, he turned to our father and began speaking with startling disregard. "Dad, I've gotten myself into debt again. I need your help." "What?" I gasped in shock at Alex's words. Instead of showing any concern for our father's condition, he was suddenly talking about money and suggesting that our father had previously covered his debts. "Alex, you need to take responsibility for your own debts. Do you even grasp what Dad is going through right now?" "Shut up. I'm making Dad pay for his past mistakes. He neglected us when we were kids. He can't just buy forgiveness with money." "What?" I was stunned by Alex's despicable behavior. His words left me speechless, and I knew I had to intervene. I was the only one who could stop him. As I struggled to find the right words to respond, my sister-in-law, standing next to Alex, shot me a puzzled look. "Don't act so superior just because you're married. You're in the way, so just go home." I couldn't hold back any longer and snapped at my sister-in-law's words. "That's enough," I shouted, forgetting that we were in a hospital room. "Lily, stop," William quickly intervened, and I was momentarily taken aback. My father then quietly said, "Lily, you should go home for today," offering us a weak smile. "Thank you for coming. You can visit again another day." At my father's words, Alex and his wife looked smug and victorious. I felt a gnawing unease about leaving my father alone with them. Despite feeling guilty for my outburst in the hospital room, I knew I couldn't continue the argument and reluctantly left. Over the next few days, I anxiously worried about my father and the tension between him and Alex. Then one day, my father developed complications. The shock of his deteriorating condition was immense. His physical and mental strength waned as he struggled to eat properly, and despite the attending physician's best efforts, he passed away a few weeks later. The grief was overwhelming, but I had no time to dwell on it. Alex and his wife were entirely unhelpful, so William and I had to handle all the funeral arrangements ourselves. On the day of the funeral, as I greeted the attendees and waited for the service to begin, Alex displayed an appalling lack of respect for the occasion. He grinned broadly and said, "I'm so relieved Dad is finally gone. He was so stubborn and only cared about money. What a nuisance." "What?" I was stunned. "Dad took on your debts and you're still speaking ill of him." "Shut up," Alex snapped. "His medical bills were overwhelming, and now I can finally access his money as I see fit." "How can you be so callous?" I demanded. "After everything Dad did for you, you still criticize him. Say what you want, but no one's on your side anymore. Just get lost." I couldn't believe my own brother-in-law's behavior. Even as William stood up for me, our sister-in-law smirked and waved us away. Being married into the family doesn't make you a real part of it. I'm sure even your father-in-law wouldn't want outsiders hanging around. Just go home. Her words were a breaking point for me. To disrespect my father and dismiss my connection to this family was beyond contempt. I knew arguing would only mar Dad's funeral, so I swallowed my rage. "Fine," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I forced myself to leave, unable to give my final farewell to Dad. I vowed never to deal with these people again. However, the next day, my phone was bombarded with calls from Alex and his wife. I had a strong suspicion about what they wanted, but I chose to ignore them. I figured if I kept avoiding them, they would eventually give up. But Alex proved me wrong. He hired a detective to track me down and showed up at my apartment. "Why aren't you answering your phone?" he demanded as soon as he saw me. "We've been trying to reach you for ages. Come out here. Do you have any idea how much trouble we went through to find you?" As soon as they saw me, they began venting their frustration, bombarding me with their grievances before I could even respond. Is that lawyer telling the truth? That all of Dad's inheritance goes to you? That can't be right, can it? We're siblings, so the inheritance should be divided equally. Besides, you're the younger one, so you should get less. When I didn't respond, Alex's anger flared. Say something. It was ironic that they were the ones cutting me off when they hadn't given me a chance to speak. What the lawyer said is true. I was just as shocked when I found out. No way. So you're saying you get all of that $10 million? I'm not going to accept that. Whether you accept it or not doesn't change anything, Alex. The decision has already been made. You think you can talk back to me? You've always been useless, and you couldn't even help Dad when he needed you. You should just do as I say from now on. Alex was determined to get his hands on the inheritance, refusing to face the reality of the situation. But his efforts were in vain. Our father had explicitly excluded Alex from the list of heirs, and no amount of resistance would change that. No way. That's a lie, Alex. You made Dad cover your gambling debts under the guise of atonement. On top of that, you used Dad's stockholder benefits without permission and sold his belongings. Dad had taken steps to ensure Alex couldn't inherit his property, citing various incidents involving Alex and my sister-in-law as reasons. What you've done is more than enough to forfeit any claim to the inheritance. Take what's yours and leave. Don't ever come near me again. As Alex and his wife listened, their angry shouts subsided and their faces turned ashen with realization. Leaving them to grapple with their new reality, I started to head back to my room. My sister-in-law's voice, strained and desperate, cut through the silence. Wait, please, share the inheritance with us. Even now, my sister-in-law was pleading for a share of the inheritance. When I gave her a cold look, she started to babble frantically. We didn't even need to be asked. We assumed we'd get Dad's inheritance, so we bought a condominium in the Highlands. We borrowed money from a risky lender, thinking we could pay it back quickly. If we don't settle it soon, the interest will be unbearable. Please share some of the inheritance with us. It turned out that Alex and his wife had not only purchased the condominium but had also indulged in a lavish lifestyle after Dad's passing, gambling more than usual and splurging on designer clothes. That's not my problem, I replied flatly. Alex, clearly in panic, shouted, You've always followed my orders before. You should just do as I say now. When did this happen? I snapped back at Alex. I've built a life where I'm respected and contribute to society. I'm not the person I was back then. Don't think you can manipulate me forever. As my voice rose to match his, Alex collapsed to his knees and clung to me, sobbing. Alex is asking for family support. You should help him, my sister-in-law chimed in, raising her voice as well. I retorted sharply. You called me a stranger, insulted Dad, and dismissed our relationship. I have no obligation to help you anymore. What? How dare you? She fumed. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. Are you okay with that? At the mention of the word police, Alex and his wife bolted as if in panic. At the memorial service that followed, I encountered relatives who were still fuming over Alex's behavior. They recounted how Alex and his wife had botched Dad's funeral with their disorganized speeches and lack of decorum, leaving everyone in shock. After a lawyer informed Alex he had no claim to the inheritance, he had tried to track me down through our relatives. When they refused to reveal my whereabouts, he resorted to hiring a detective. When that failed, Alex ended up begging relatives for money, but they turned him down flatly. With no other options, Alex and his wife had to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs to escape their creditors. Months later, it seems they're still caught in a cycle of evasion, perpetually on the run from their debtors. I can only imagine how weary his wife must be of this life, but she likely can't leave him and they must be constantly at odds. Meanwhile, William and I, unable to attend my father's funeral, make a point of visiting his grave once a month. Thanks to my father's support, I've become a nurse and found the love of my life through my career. I intend to honor his memory every day by giving my best in all that I do.